Well, here we are again. Here we are again, September 22nd, 2023, and the news just doesn't stop. And Robert is here with me. Say hi to everybody, Robert.
Hey everybody, how's it going?
This is new for us as far as doing it on our own. Normally we have like a producer, a team behind us, all that. So we're trying this on our own and we're going to get better at it. And I want to thank all the new subscribers that are coming in, all the new listeners. We're going to build this and we're going to build this up big, and I want every one of you out there to be a part of it with us. So, listen, I want to touch off first of all on some really important news, and it has to do with Russia and this Dmitry Medvedev, the deputy chairman of the Russian Security Council, who has served the role of issuing more severe read between the lines warnings and threats fresh off of Vladimir Putin. And this is according to his speech. And I know we touched on this a little bit yesterday, but his speech talks about the partial mobilization of national forces, which confirmed referendums of occupied portions of Ukraine to join the Russian Federation. And Putin's most alarming line came when he said, if the territorial integrity of our country is threatened, we will certainly use all the means of our disposal to protect Russia and our people, following with, it's not a bluff. So the Medvedev, he's taken the president's words further by today's statements, and he said there is no going back, and that's even a nuclear option that could be on the table.
Golly.
Scary things.
Yeah.
And Russia has actually announced that not only mobilization capabilities, but also any Russian weapons, including strategic nuclear weapons and weapons based on new principles, could be used for such protection. So they're putting out a pretty big threat out there. And Putin's emphasis of this is not a bluff. And analysts are saying that this is all about posturing in order to scare NATO away from the escalation. And they say, I think it signals that he wants people to think he would risk nuclear war. This is what O'Brien, a professor of strategic studies at the University of St. Andrews, said in Scotland. He says, I don't think it means he is any more likely to do it than he was yesterday. Yet Washington is saying that it's taken the nuclear statements very seriously. So, these are something that we should always keep in the back of our minds, because we never know what a crazy dictator such somebody like Putin could actually do. And, I was talking to a client yesterday that's that's over in Alaska, and they're very afraid over there, because there's been planes flying over there. There's been a lot of different things over there. So that's one thing I wanted to touch on the news today. But I also want to touch on this global food crisis. And, we talked about the food crisis that's hitting here at home, here in the United States, because of inflation and causing people to have to cut back on their food and on their groceries and on the essential things that they need. And even when that lady was saying in the statement yesterday, thank God her child was still so young that he didn't eat as much. That right there just tore me apart.
Yeah, it broke my heart.
Oh, but listen, World Food Program right now, the WFP and the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations are now out with a new report outlining countries that are either already starving or on the brink of a disaster. And they found that 19 hunger spots worldwide, with most countries in Africa, the Middle East, and even in Central America. They call for urgent humanitarian action between October 22nd and 23rd to avoid huge loss of life. They say Afghanistan, Ethiopia, Southern Sudan, Somalia, Nigeria, it goes on and on, are the hot spots of the highest concern, facing catastrophic hunger levels. And they also go on to say here that, the senior analyst of the Analysis and Early Warning Unit at the WFP said that the world is facing a food crisis of unprecedented proportions, the largest in modern history, and millions are at risk of worsening hunger unless action is taken now. And it just goes on and on talking about the world hunger right now. And so, these things are real. And, it's actually starting to touch down here because of inflation. Now, talking about inflation, I want to share this with you. This came out today, and it talks about how Powell says there's no painless way to tame inflation. In other words, we're going to feel a lot more pain. And he vows to crush demand, and he's going to dent the job market. So Jerome Powell sent a stark message to markets following the decision to hike rates by another 75 basis points yesterday, with the central bank chief telling reporters that there's no painless way to bring down inflation, and warning there could be more than just a relatively modest rise in employment as the feds tighten aggressively to dent demand. And Powell made the remarks in a press conference yesterday, the 21st, which came after a decision by the Federal Open Market, it's called the FOM, committee, and to deliver another jumbo rate hike, bringing the benchmark lending rate to range between 3 and 3.25%. And the central bank head said that inflation was running too high and warned that rates are heading higher and poised to stay at a restrictive level for some time. So, like you put your shoe on every day, you get used to putting that shoe on every day. Guess what? We got to start getting used to this inflation, because it sounds like it's going to get much higher. And I was looking at something we'll talk about here in a little bit, where 2 loaves of bread are $8. Oreo, the cheaper bread, is now 2 loaves of bread. That means it's $4 a loaf for the bread. Remember, I told you yesterday, I have a friend of mine over in Germany who's telling me that it's $8 to $9 for a loaf of bread. And they're on the euro. And the euro right now is at $1 to $1. Anyway, goes on. It says, Powell said at the press conference that the Fed, listen to the words he says. This is Powell, who's usually really, meek, quiet on the podium, but he says that the Fed is taking forceful and rapid steps to bring down demands in the U.S. economy, which has been the dominant factor behind soaring inflation. And while there's been debate around whether supply-side bottlenecks or high consumer demand caused the inflationary tidal wave that American households are having right now, and a recent Fed study concluded that around 60% of the cause can be attributed to stimulus-fueled demand surge. And Powell vowed to erode demand to bring it into balance with supply, which has been constrained by various factors, including geopolitical conflicts and the rejigging of supply chains as deglobalization grinds ahead. And the chair also noted that bringing inflation down to the central bank's 2% target, listen to this, would likely require a sustained period of below-trend growth, and that there would very likely be some softening of labor market conditions. In other words, what he's trying to say in a way that doesn't scare everybody, and let's just be real, is that there's a lot of layoffs coming very, very soon. In fact, Amazon's already talking about it. Look at what FedEx did last Friday. They came out, lost 17% of their shares overnight. Their shares still have gone down, and now they're talking about lessening up operations in some places and shutting down stores. So they, that's what he's talking about here. And he was blunt about the pain to come, and citing rising joblessness and singing out the housing market, which has now been a major contributor to inflation as being likely in the need of a correction. So as the economic glooms deepens, the Fed has embarked on its rate tight cycle, and the housing market now is now starting to show signs of cooling. Even these big $1 million home, multi-million-dollar homes, they're even showing signs. And the NAR, the National Association of Realtors, reported yesterday on September 21st that the sales of previously owned homes dropped for the 7th straight month. Remember, we've been talking about the 7th straight month. That's how long this has all been going on now, y'all. And the housing sector is the most sensitive to the experiences that the most immediate impacts from the Federal Reserve's interest rate policy change. And this is what this chief economist, Loris Young, who is the NAR, said in a statement. He says, the softness in home sales reflects this year's escalating mortgage rates. And with these basis points going up now, look at everything is like more inflation, credit card debt going to go higher, mortgage rates are going to go higher. The good thing is that your interest rate in your savings account will go a little higher, what they'll pay you. But the bottom line is it's not good for our economy. And, he just talks more and more about of mortgaging. And that's what we're getting ready to see next, is we're getting ready to see a big housing bubble burst. And, we've been talking about this for a long time. I've been talking about it for 2-3 years. I've been talking about how the bubbles are just getting bigger and bigger and how they're going to end up bursting. And we're now seeing these bubbles burst. Powell contradicts Biden on inflation running too high. And in his much anticipated remarks on the economy following the Fed's policy meeting, they saw another jumbo interest rate hike. Powell is basically contradicting what Biden is saying because, President Biden, he's talking about how it just went up a little bit. But when you look at the numbers on everything right here, Powell spoke to reporters delivering this sobering message on soaring prices. This isn't what the Biden administration is saying. They're saying that, it just went up a little bit. In fact, he says the central bank chief also said that various measures of price pressures show that inflation is running too high. And he says we've seen some supply side healing, but inflation has not really come down. And if you look at a core PCE inflation, which is a good measure of where inflation is running now, and if you look at it on a 3, 6, and 12-month trailing annualized basis, you'll see that inflation is at 4.8%, 4.5%, and 4.8%, he added. And Powell remarks stand in stark contrast with Biden's recent message on inflation in an eyebrow interviewing that aired on CBS 60 Minutes this past Sunday, when Biden downplayed the inflationary pressures facing Americans' families. And the president literally said in the interview that inflation over the past few months hasn't spiked, and that the monthly rate of inflation was negligible. And the inflation rate month to month was just an inch, hardly at all, he said. And Biden said in a response to a question by CBS Scott Pelley, who noted that the most recent CPI's Consumer Price Index came in at an annual 8.3%, which is close to a multi-decade high, and that the Americans were shocked by their grocery bills. Well, we heard about that yesterday when that journalist was over there in Houma, Louisiana at Rouse's grocery store and interviewing those people that were going in and out of the grocery store. Not one of them had a good thing to say. In fact, they were tears in the eyes of some of them, including mine yesterday. And the president replied to Pelley's question by calling for a perspective and focusing on the month-over-month rate of inflation in August which was 0.1% rather than the year over pace of 8.3%. And Biden's remark on inflation sparked a flurry of critical takes from Republicans and others. And you can understand why. I mean, it just never stops. You want to say something?
Well, no, it seems like we're headed towards a very, very grim future. You know, if you actually look at real inflation right now using shadow stats, using the tracking method from 1980, right? Real inflation, according to shadow stats, is at 18.7%. It just seems like right now we're going to have out of control inflation. Things are going to get worse. People are going to lose their job. It's very, very grim for the future.
Yeah,
It's
a lot of
unprecedented.
layoffs coming is what I feel. Hey, I want to share this with you. So this came out. This is news today. This is from a Supreme Court in Florida. How it is talking about ruling on its power to regulate social media, and a Florida Attorney General, Ashley Moody, filed an appeal with the Supreme Court asking the court to decide if states have the power to regulate how social media companies moderate content on their platforms. And given growing public interest in the issue of social media censorship, the Supreme Court may have difficulty refusing to hear the case. And the case pits the right of individual Americans to express themselves freely online against the right of social media platforms to make editorial decisions about content. And Republicans and conservatives, they've complained for years about being censored by these platforms. And they're furious when platforms banned the then President Donald Trump in January 2021, and they blocked a New York Post article about Hunter Biden's laptop computer and silenced dissenting opinions on the origins of the CCP virus and on treatments for the disease that it causes. And Democrats and liberals say that the platforms don't do enough to suppress so-called hate speech and alleged misinformation. And the petition in the case known as Attorney General State of Florida, Net Choice LLC is what this case was filed just here on September 21st, yesterday. And Net Choice, so y'all know, is a coalition of trade associations that are representing social media companies and e-commerce businesses. And the filing comes as a majority of U.S. states now are looking at legislation that would regulate social media platforms such as Twitter and Facebook in the public interest.
That's not right.
I don't think it's
I'm
right
against
either.
That. Hey,
It sounds like China to me.
North Korea.
North Korea.
God.
Look, Florida and Texas have enacted laws that impose limitations on. I know what they're saying. I hear what they're saying, but I just don't like it. Look, that impose limitations on the ability of social media companies to moderate speech on platforms and mandate that the companies provide disclosure to the public. What happened to free speech?
I mean, what's next? The social credit
Yeah,
score?
and it says here the social media businesses say that Florida and Texas laws that would limit their ability to ban political speech they consider objectionable violate the First Amendment. And supporters of the law counter that because the Biden administration, including the FBI, has been pressuring the platforms to censor speech, the platforms lose their First Amendment protection because they become agents of the government. Sounds like a movie almost. It's crazy. And appellate courts disagree on the constitutionality of the two state laws. And on May 23rd, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit struck down much of the Florida law. And when Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who's a Republican, signed the measures, he said its purpose was to fight the biased silencing of our freedom of speech as conservatives by the big tech oligarchs in Silicon Valley. And the 11th Circuit stated in the ruling that with minor exceptions, the government can't tell a private person or an entity of what to say or how to say it. I agree. I don't think the government should be able to tell us anything, right? If we're going to say something, we should be able to say it. Free speech.
Exactly.
And we hold that it's substantially likely that, it says here, that social media companies, even the biggest ones, are private actors whose rights the First Amendment protects. And that their so-called content moderation decisions constitute protected exercises of editorial judgment, and that the provisions of the new Florida law that restrict large platforms' ability to engage in content moderation unconstitutionally burden their prerogatives, and that the 11th Circuit left undisturbed a portion of law requiring companies to provide more transparency about their moderation policies. So, and it says here, we agree with Florida that the U.S. Supreme Court should hear this case, and that we're confident that the First Amendment rights of our website will be upheld. And NetChoice Vice President Carl Sosbo said in a statement, "We have the Constitution and over a century of president on our side."
Interesting.
Heavy words, heavy words. Look, I want to go back to talking about inflation again. And this is something that came out today. And this is, to me, inflation is the most important thing out there right now, because that's what infects all of us. It's a pandemic. It's not COVID. It's not anything like this. Is a pandemic. Inflation is affecting every one of us because it's affecting all of our ways of spending, whether it's in a grocery store, whether it's buying a used or new car, whether it's paying your rent, whether it's paying a mortgage. Inflation and interest rates are a pandemic right now. And Americans are set to fork out an extra $11,500 this year if they want to enjoy the same standard of living that they maintained in 2020. And this is according to new estimates from NerdWallet. And the estimates published in August were based on inflation and annual spending data from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. Analysts at NerdWallet looked at how spending would be compared this year to 2020 when the COVID-19 pandemic began. And analysts say that 2020 was the last full year when inflation was relatively stable. And in the same year, the U.S. inflation rate was 1.23%. And as of August, inflation in the United States stands at 8.3%. And that's according to the status, the data that's coming from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And according to shadowstats.com, which is a little bit different, they go on a different scale. It's more like 17.5% to 18% inflation. You be the judge of that. And in 2020, it stands to reach $72,900, which is a difference of more than $11,500 if consumers want to maintain the same standard of living that they've had in the past. And NerdWallet analysts say that this is an average estimate and therefore one that is exact to a very few. And those who earn and therefore spend more will see more dramatic dollar increases. And those who earn less may see less dramatic dollar jumps, but the impact of these rising prices could be more significantly felt. And that's what I'm talking about. We're all feeling it. You, me, Robert, all of us. It's costing us more and more. And according to these analysts, the total monthly household expenditures are up $961 from 2020, while spending on groceries is up $101, shelter is up $120, and household utilities are up $70 per household. while gasoline has risen by a whopping $209. And NerdWallet noted that the spending figures for 2020 were less than typical given that COVID-19 pandemic restrictions meant that fewer people were commuting or forking out for children and entertainment, resulting in an overall decline in spending. And it's a safe assumption that people will spend less in certain categories this year too. And if not for other reasons, then avoiding high prices is what they wrote. And this is particularly why we think spending in 2022 will be more similar to 2020 than 2019, for example, another year for which spending data was available. And a separate analysis from the Joint Economic Committee Republicans estimates that the inflation now is costing American households an extra $717 each month. Although this is even higher in the states of Colorado. Listen to this. If you're in Colorado, $937. Utah, $910. And those of you that are in Arizona, $833. So on an annual basis, the committee estimates that households will have to fork out an extra $8,607. And the Federal Reserve approved another 75 basis points yesterday to a target range of 3% to 3.25%, and indicated more large increases are on the horizon. They're on their way to try to cool down inflation. And recent indicators point to modest growth in spending and production. And job gains have been robust in recent months, and the unemployment rate has remained low. Inflation remains elevated, reflecting supply and demand imbalances related to the pandemic. Higher food and energy prices and broader price pressures is what the Fed said in a statement. And Fed officials also cited Russia's war over in Ukraine for creating an additional upward pressure on inflation and adding weight to global economic activity. Meanwhile, we've got President Joe Biden insisted earlier this weekend again with an interview that inflation hasn't spiked in recent months and remains basically even. I don't know what your feelings are on that, but I know it costs me a lot more for goods. Look at here. I was talking about it.
There it is right there.
You can see it right there if you can see this. 2 loaves for $8. All right, let's talk about one last thing here. And this is Gotham City. I mean,
bananas. This is insane.
Unbelievable. And this has to do with New York in the grip of organized street crime. And this is really something else. I mean, how many of us have watched the Batman, the Riddler, the Joker? I won't mention who's the Riddler and who's the Joker in Gotham City, but you figure it out, right? I think there was even a corrupted mayor in that city, in Batman at one time. So,
of course.
Wasn't it?
Yeah.
The one that had the coin or something? I can't quite remember it, but it was a corrupt. Anyway, listen to this. Crime in New York City has exploded this year. And the last time that the Big Apple saw more theft rotting its core, Frank Sinatra was still alive. After a surge in shootings over the previous 2 years, murders have somehow subsided. Instead, nearly all other forms of crime have mushroomed. And the city's police department, the NYPD, has been arresting people at numbers not seen for decades, but with limited effect. The criminals are often quickly right back on the streets. That's not just in New York. That's happening in a lot of places. Even here where I'm at in Los Angeles, we see people getting in, and it's like, put them in, put them out. But anyway, just as in many other major cities, there we go, across the country, New York City is scourged by shoplifters who fill up their bags with merchandise and walk out of the store in plain view. Petty theft is up 43% so far this year, with over 82,000 reported incidents. That's the most since at least 1995, according to the NYPD crime data portal. Grand theft, which usually refers to pickpocketing or theft over $1,000 in value, went up more than 44%, with over 36,000 incidents, the most since 1998. Robberies, meaning are up over 38%. And it says here, the NYPD has identified a new pattern where criminals appear to be more organized and systematic. And we've seen multiple robberies committed in a short time span. And the criminals will steal a vehicle and then use it for a quick crime spree. And in one such incident on August the 29th, several young men stole a Honda Civic around 4 a.m. in the morning in the posh Park Slope neighborhood in Brooklyn. Yeah, that's a nice area. I've actually been there. Less than an hour later, they pulled up on Union Turnpike in Queens and robbed a 7-Eleven at gunpoint. Then they hit another 7-Eleven half an hour later and 2 more stores an hour after that. Remember, they're riding around in this Honda Civic that they stole, and they're robbing these stores. The police arrested several suspects, including one minor and one 18-year-old, with 78 prior arrests, including 7 robberies. He's 18 years old. He's been arrested 78 times. How many hundreds of New Yorks has he victimized, and yet he keeps being released only to go back and victimize others? This is what new NYPD Chief of Department Ken Corey said during a presser, noting that robbery has been sky high. Well, the street crime boom coincides with Manhattan District Alvin Bragg taking office in January after winning his race with significant financial backing from progressive billionaire George Soros. And just 2 days after that, George Soros is putting money everywhere, isn't he?
Money in all places.
He's got money in it. He ain't feeling no inflation.
Not at all.
Where the heck where you getting all that money? George Soros, just 2 days after assuming office, Bragg issued a memo constraining prosecutions for lower level offenses, including some armed robberies, a low level offense, including some armed robberies and some burglaries. So you can just go in with a gun, hold someone up, and that's considered a lower level offense?
It's a slap on the wrist. It's insane.
Wow. Hey, listen to this. In 2019, the New York State legislature passed a bail reform that bars judges from setting cash bail in many non-violent and some violent offenses, including most second-degree burglaries and some second-degree robberies. I ain't making this up. This is real. Mayor Adams, that's the mayor of New York City, a former NYPD officer who ran last year partially on a law and order platform, called for changes to the bail reform law. He noted that the state is the only one in the country that blocks judges from considering the danger an offender poses when deciding whether or not to set bail, according to an August 3rd statement from Adams' office. So it sounds like he's even wanting he wants things changed. So he sounds like he's a good mayor. He's just got a corrupt city underneath him. In New York City, for example, nearly 60% of robbery arrests were black in 2021. But the city's population is less than 24% black. I'm going to say that again. In New York City, for example, nearly 60% of robbery arrests were black in 2021. But the city's population is less than 24% black. So by contrast, over 40% of the city is white, but only 6% of robbery arrests were white. So the argument thus assumes that police single out black people for arrest and DAs should show leniency to robbery suspects to lower incarceration rates among blacks. This is a clown show. First, close to 65% of robbery suspects were identified as black, while less than 5% as white. This means, or what that means, is that the black suspects were less likely to be arrested than the white suspects. So, wow. So the state's lawmakers and the New York governor, Kathy Hochul, agreed in April to tweak the rules to allow bail for a somewhat wider range of crimes, such as gun-related crimes, hated crimes, and repeat theft offenses. I wonder if that governor, Kathy Hochul, and Mayor Eric Adams, who was an actual police officer, I wonder if they get along. I wonder what.
Not based upon her statements there.
This Kathy Hochul sounds like
she's a radical.
She sounds radical. I don't know. I'm just saying. She doesn't sound cool. She sounds like she just wants to. Yeah, she sounds like the Joker in the riddle. She sounds like the one. Anyway, police officers have complained about other issues as well, such as general disrespect toward the profession, as well as the city's change in use of force rules a few years ago that outlawed some martial arts techniques used to safely subdue resisting suspects. No person shall restrain, this is what a 2020 city law says, no person shall restrain an individual in a manner that restricts the flow of air or blood by sitting, kneeling, or standing on the chest or back in a manner that compresses the diaphragm in the course of effecting or attempting to effect an arrest. Such positions are virtually unavoidable in arresting a restraining subject without using a baton, taser, or a gun, according to Rainer Gracie, a martial arts instructor who's been teaching law enforcement defense techniques from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for more than 20 years. You're one of those guys.
Yeah. Okay.
Knows Jiu-Jitsu and boxing.
Yeah.
Robert used to be a boxer growing up.
That's right.
It says arrests that fail or escalate to higher levels of violence are usually those when the officers failed to pin the subject down. The law is worded so broadly as to make it illegal even when an officer ends up in one of them forbidden positions accidentally and the suspect suffers no injury. It's now going to make it impossible for police officers to overpower somebody without hurting them. And several current and former NYPD officers previously told that many officers are looking for early retirement. I can see why. I wouldn't even know why you would even want to become an officer.
Not in New York.
It sounds like you'd have better luck in Russia or Ukraine as a soldier than you would in New York. Are looking for early retirement due to the increasing difficulty of doing their jobs. Since 2019, the city has lost more than, 2,000 police officers, with retirement slated to be the highest on record. And this is what the New York Post reported in June. Why would an individual even want to go to police academy or training and become a police officer if you know any of your rights are going to be taken away from you because they're basically defunding whatever it is that you stand for?
It's a big problem.
Huge problem.
Big problem.
Huge. You got anything you want to say?
I just say this. I mean, you can't make any of this news up. Like, we have soaring inflation. It seems like, according to the FOMC meeting yesterday, it's here to stay. It's only going to get worse. Not to mention, Americans are going to pack on a bunch of debt. There could be potential massive defaults. it's just going to be a huge struggle if you don't get your house in order.
Yeah, give them our 800 number. Listen, any of you out there that just want to call, want to talk, we can give you some suggestions on what you can do to protect yourself from all of this that's coming at you. Bottom line is, you want to start getting everything in order, because it sounds like a lot of what we're used to having is being taken away from us. So you want to give them the phone number?
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be 1-800-753-8534. That's 800-753-8534.
Listen, want to appreciate y'all coming, listening. Those of you that are searching and looking for something like us that you can learn a little bit from. We're on every day from 8 to 8:30. We may go over a little bit longer, but we're just giving you the real news, not a hoax. I should call this thing, it's not a hoax. I just want to give out the real stuff. I've got, a lot of people, a lot of clients out there that are listening to me right now, and things will get better. It's just that they're destroying it all on the way down, and when we get it back, we just have to make it great again.
That's all you can do.
Have a good day.